Hello, friends. Good evening. So glad to see so many of you here tonight. Thank you for coming. You are in for a treat. Ron Greer is an amazing speaker, an amazing author, and we are happy to have him here. In case you don't know, he is also an ordained United Methodist elder. He's the director of the Pastoral Counseling Center over at Peachtree Road, United Methodist Church, and he's been there for 40 years. That's a long time, and that's great. I bet you were. If that, right? Yeah. Ron has written 5 books, and I think I've read every one of them. The most recent book, many of you have heard Phil talk about during his sermons over the last couple of months, The Quiet House, Reflections on the Loss of a Spouse. They are Ron's personal reflections on losing a spouse, and he offers some paths toward healing, restoration, and then eventually transition into the new life that lies ahead. And I know we have some people in here tonight that are on that road, and so this should be really helpful for you. We're talking about resiliency, but also knowing that this book is in the back of his mind all the time. You'll hear something about that too, I'm sure. He's also written a book, The Path of Compassion. Now that they are grown, successfully parenting adult children. I have read that one, and it's come in handy. This next one I have given to college graduates. If you know who you are, you'll know what to do. Living with Integrity. Fantastic book. Yeah, and then another book on grief, Markings on the Windowsill, a book about grief that's really about hope. Another fantastic book. Ron is a native of Louisiana. Northern Louisiana, right? Yeah. He has a Bachelor of Science from LSU, and we'll let him get by with that. It's okay. I went to A&M, so I'll let you by with that one. He's also got a Master of Divinity from the Candler School of Theology at Emory University and a Master of Theology and Pastoral Counseling from Columbia Theological Seminary, which is located in Decatur. Ron and his late wife, Karen, were married for 49 years. He's the proud dad of 2 adult children, Patrick and Brooke, and he's the grandfather of 3 delightful grandsons, one of whom is seated in the front row. This is William, if you get a chance to meet him. So with that, Ron, we are so thankful that you were here, and we look forward to your talk, and I'll invite you to come up.
It is always a joy to be back at Dunwoody, and to have my grandson on the front row makes it even more special. So good to be here. Diane and I are talking about, someone were asking about the new book that you had referenced, The Quiet House, and I'm going to be back. I'm like kudzu, you cannot get rid of me. I'm going to be back in the spring, and we're going to be talking about that book, and more broadly, we're going to be talking about grief and how we best go through that valley, successfully navigating through that valley, because what we're looking for is healing and hope. And tonight, we're going to be talking about resiliency, which, just as you said, is a very parallel theme. I know that Grace and Lindsay were preaching on mental health and mental wellness this Sunday, and then tonight we're also talking about mental health and wellness. So we have a theme going here, and hopefully we're each continuing. I wish I could have heard Grace and Lindsay's sermons Sunday, but I'm trust that we are building on each other's ideas. And I know that many of you here tonight are part of the Stephen Ministry and are part of the One Lamb Initiative. And I'm telling you, you have got wonderful ministries here in countless ways, but those are 2 of them. And I can only imagine how much you appreciate and respect all the good that they do. Tonight, we're going to focus on resiliency, responding to life's deeper challenges. Hey, Phil, good to see you.
Sorry, we have a Jack-o'-lantern Jubilee tonight. Soccer pictures, Molly, you, there's a lot going on. So Ron, bless you here.
Well, I'm I'm delighted to be here. I walked past the pumpkin carving down there, and I think, oh my gosh, anybody that attended that first and comes here, what a disappointment I'll be. Life is filled with blessings, and life has periodic heartaches. The blessings we respond to with rejoicing and celebration. The heartaches, the wounds, the traumas in life that we all experience. That requires a little more thinking as to how we respond to those. And that's what we're here to think through tonight. What do we do with the heartaches? What do we do with the wounds? What do we do with the traumas? I think of the third verse of one of our favorite hymns, Amazing Grace. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. Through many traumas, toils, through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. Those are the traumas. Those are the wounds. Those are the heartaches. That will be our first focus tonight. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home, to arrive back home, to a place of healing, to a place of restoration, to a place of wholeness, to a place of fulfillment. It is by way of grace. A grace we call resiliency. Challenges, struggles, at times heartache. They come with life. They come with living the lives that each of us have. Someone once wrote, it is said that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I should be able to bench press a Buick by now. These struggles, these heartaches that I'm talking about are on a continuum of severity, from the merely problematic to the severely traumatic. Those on this end, the merely problematic, they're no fun, but we can handle those. Those don't take us down. Those on this end, the severely traumatic, are the ones that will get our focus tonight. That's where we're going to focus in and think about how do we handle those moments that are traumatic or distressing or really heartbreaking in whatever way, in whatever dimension they are, whether it is a tragic accident or whether it is a loss via death. From the times that we have found ourselves in emotional pain, from all the different sources, from the suffering of an illness, the sorrow of a loss, the terror of an accident, the heartache of betrayal, the ache of humiliation, the disappointment of failure, the distress of shame, the rejection of abandonment, the torment of abuse, the anguish of a hope, a dream, an aspiration, vanished, gone, lost forever. As the psalmist said, weeping may linger for the night. We have known those nights. We've all been there. It's a part of living our lives. As Ralph McGill once said, with just a hint of levity, the fleas come with the dog. The heartache comes with living these lives. Reflect with me for just a moment. When have you been there? When have you had that kind of torment in your life? When have you suffered that kind of loss? When have you had that kind of distress, that kind of heartache in your life? Think back. Remember? Remember what it felt like. Remember the ache. Take just a moment. All of us have known those moments. For some, those moments have been traumatic moments. Now here I use the word trauma descriptively, not clinically. We've come to associate the word trauma with first responders or horrific accidents, but the word trauma goes back to the Latin root word that simply means wounding. When I think of trauma, I think of emotional injuries resulting from distress. When I think of trauma, I don't think of guns blazing, the screeching of tires. I think of the agony. I think of the anxiety. I think of the pain. I think of the heart under distress. When I think of trauma, I think of the amygdala, the emotional center of the brain, the amygdala flashing, the adrenaline rushing with that fight, flight, or freeze response. When there's a traumatic event that happens with any of us, for most of us, within a fairly brief period of time, the experience, the rush begins to subside. The emotions are felt, exposed, expressed, and worked through. And then slowly they dissipate. We may know stress, but we're not continually distressed. We may know trauma, but we're not traumatized by it. And then there's a small group that is. And it may be because of the severity of the wound, or it may be because of the repeated frequency of the wound. It may be because it is so prolonged, the distress under which they live. But for whatever reason, they are traumatized, and they need to get help. And they need to get help in the moment. They need to get help immediately. And then there's another group that works through much of the trauma or the distress that they had gone through, having done that, thinking that they had finished their job, the task was over. Then they moved on with their lives, not realizing that they were repressing or denying more emotion that went underground. But it didn't go away. It still was alive and well in there. And of course, the result is, on occasion, what we came to call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Those times that they would wake up weeks, months, even years later, in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. Or it may be that some event happened in their lives and suddenly it triggered an emotional anxiety. Where on earth did that come from? And they remember where it came from. By the way, it was in a very rough form in terms of the communication of it, but they have identified that PTSD is documented to have gone back as far as 1300 BC. In other words, it has always been a part of our lives. But it was following the Vietnam War that it was identified, and it was given a name. You cannot fight in the jungles of Vietnam or in the deserts of Afghanistan and feel what you're feeling and do the job that you are there to do at the same time. You've got to repress it. You have got to hold it in. And so it's plowed under until you get back stateside. And then months or years later, it comes out in a flourish. And that is when the name PTSD was first defined, was in the mid to late 70s. And it was in 1980 that it became a diagnostic category in the DSM-3 as post-traumatic stress disorder, which was identified as triggered by a terrifying event, either experiencing it or witnessing it. And there were two important things that happened when it was given a name. Number one is it was given a name, and it was also given faces with whom this dynamic could be identified. And that was these soldiers who were struggling with it, which suddenly we understood in a way that we'd never understood before what trauma was really all about. But very few suffer from PTSD. Thank goodness. Because very few have traumas in their lives that are that severe or are that prolonged. But there are a number who struggle with a very parallel dynamic. And there's a new category. It's not a clinical category, it's a clinical description, and it's called PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury. It's the same dynamic. It's emotions, trauma emotions, distress emotions, grief emotions that are plowed under and therefore go underground. They become subconscious, and then somehow one day they are triggered. And we wonder why we're feeling the distress that we're feeling. We wonder why we're feeling the depression or the anxiety that we're feeling. It's PTSI. Again, not a diagnosis, but it's just a description. And we discover that the injury, to a degree, is still there. And it is reminding us that it is, and it's reminding us that it still needs to be worked on. It still needs successfully to be dealt with. When this distress is honored and engaged and worked through, then we come back, fully come back. We come back healed, we come back restored, we come back enjoying and connecting with our life again. But whether it's PTSD, PTSI, or just having a traumatic or distressing experience in our lives, all of us have been there. We know those stressful events, we know failures, we know loss, we know heartache. We've been there, or we are there, or we're going to be there. So, our reason for gathering tonight, how do we respond? How do we respond to those times, to those wounds, to those traumas? How do we respond? At our best, we respond with resiliency. The resiliency grounded in our faith. Resiliency is defined as the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. Its Latin origin literally translates to leap back. Resiliency is to leap back from the distress of the wound, to leap back to return to where we were before, which of course simply means to heal. First, we leap back, we recover, we heal, and then we move forward, the stronger for having been there, to grow into someone we have never been before. Resiliency, to me this is very important. Resiliency is not in our DNA. It's not something that we're either born with or we're not. It's something we either learn and practice or we don't. But resiliency, being able to bounce back, being able to come back, and then being able to grow forward for more, to become more than we've ever been before, is something that we each can learn to do and we can each incorporate into our living. Resiliency is to return to that healthy, positive place. It always reminds me of the words of Jesus when Jesus said that I came that you may have life and have it abundantly. That was the goal, according to Jesus. I'm pulling out the big guns here. Jesus said he wanted for each of us to live abundantly. And then life comes along and sucker punches us. And we're doubled over in pain. And what we're living in that moment may be a lot of things, but it is not abundant living. And that's where resiliency comes in, because it takes God-given resiliency then to bounce back from the trauma and to come back into that healthy place of abundant living. We have often no control over what life does to us, over the blows that we receive, but we are absolutely in control of how we respond to it. From my personal and professional experience, what I want to share tonight are a handful of pillars of resiliency. Those markers that tend to guide us from the distress back to living abundantly. Let's begin with the big picture. Let's begin with the foundation that we all lay prior to anything distressing happening to us. The foundation that we lay to build so that when those tidal waves come in, we're ready for them. We're grounded with that firm foundation. We begin with a lifestyle. We begin to address resiliency before it's ever needed with developing a healthful lifestyle that lays that foundation. This is fundamental. We must be proactive. We all know the list of what has come to be called self-care. Just the headlines of the list are live your faith, enjoy those you love, read what inspires you, do what gives you energy, get rest, be grateful, live with purpose, be led by the Spirit, enjoy your community, experience awe, eat healthfully, exercise, play, have fun. There'll be a quiz on this later, by the way. And be true to who you are. All of the things that go into the balanced diet of a healthy lifestyle. By the way, there are three of these that are most closely associated with living with resiliency and responding to life struggles with resiliency. The three are to live with faith, to live in relationship, and to live with purpose. Those tend to set the stage, most specifically, of a resilient lifestyle of bouncing back from the crises in life. We're going to be talking about the faith and the relationships in just a few minutes, but let me take just a moment to comment on the purpose. Just think about if you're in a time of distress or a time of depression or a time of anxiety in your life because of some event that has come along. Purpose. If you live with purpose, that purpose is going to do one of two things. Either that purpose is going to be calling you through this valley, through this distressful time in your life, because you have got a purpose for which you're living, and that is going to fuel your motivation to move through the valley to the far side. Or I know sometimes that people are given purpose by the very trauma that they're going through. They take that blow and they want to help, and now they know what it's like, and they want to help others who go through a similar valley, and how can others respond to the same thing. And so that then becomes a purpose for their life. I don't know, like some guys will experience a loss and write a book on it, I don't know. No, never mind, nobody would do that, Purpose, faith, relationship. Keep those in mind, because those three are very important to a life of resiliency. And we'll get to the other two in just a moment. We begin with the healthy lifestyle. And again, they call it self-care these days. We all know that stuff. You could have made that list at least as well, if not better than I did, okay? We all know that stuff. That's not our problem. We're bright folks. We're at Dunwoody Methodist and Peachtree Road. We're bright folks, let's face it. We know this stuff. That's not our problem. Our problem is, and this is embarrassing, we just don't do it. Okay. Our problem is that we don't focus on those things that will build that foundation. We just forget to do it. Our favorite phrase is, we just don't get around to it. Okay. I once heard someone say, if most people love their neighbors as themselves, they'd be arrested. Remember the list. Begin with your faith, with your community, relationships, and with your purposes in life. Begin with those and be building that foundation of a healthy lifestyle. Okay. We begin with that. And then when that challenging moment hits, whatever the distress, know that your attitude sets your sails toward healing. Resilience begins with an intentional attitude that you are coming back, that you are going to heal. Whatever blow life hits you, as I said a moment ago, you may not be able to dodge the blow, but you are fully in charge of how you respond to it. As Robert Louis Stevenson said, life isn't a matter of being dealt good cards, but playing a poor hand well. Today we're talking about mental health from 30,000 feet, the broad view, whether it's anxiety or stress or depression, addiction, all of the above. And with all of the above, our attitude sets our sails toward getting through that valley. Our attitude sets our sails to getting to the far side of each of them. Whatever your challenge, let your attitude be one of resiliency, that you will bring your best to the challenge. I do not know a better example of this than my wife, Karen. 40 years ago this month, Karen and I lost our 2-year-old son, who tragically killed in an accident. Less than a month after Eric died, Karen said, and I remember her words 40 years later, Karen said, we're going to make it through this, and we are going to have fun, and we are going to enjoy our lives again. Because if we don't, then Eric will not have been the only one who died. I know what you're thinking right now. That boy married way over his head. That is resiliency. We're coming back. We're coming back. Some assume quite the opposite. They assume that when a traumatic event happens in their life, when they receive that sucker punch and are doubled over in pain, that it will permanently destroy the quality of their lives. And their assumption becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We all know those who suffer from this. They throw up their hands. They assume the posture of a victim. This is especially true, in my experience, by the way, especially true for parents who lose a child, for spouses who lose a husband or wife, or for anyone who is incarcerated. They figure that the quality of their life is over, that it has now been defined by the blow that they have received. If life victimizes you, do not accept victim as your identity. It is something that happened to us. it is not who we are. We can persevere and rebound with resiliency. Our attitude sets our sails. Resiliency says we are going not just to survive, but we're going to thrive. It begins with the attitude. As simple as, I hesitate to bring this up, to use this phrase because it sounds so trite, so trite. But it's true. The garden we water is the garden we grow. And if I am focused on the fact that I'm coming back, and I'm going to come back, not only am I going to heal, but I'm going to grow from the experience. I'm going to be somebody that I've never been before when I get to the far end of this valley, then that is going to set the stage for the success of doing that. That's going to be in the positive way, the self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, let me pause for a moment. By the way, don't worry about the phone. I'm just always relieved it wasn't mine. Let me pause for a moment and do a quick aside. And that is that if resiliency, if this whole resilience thing ever begins to sound easy, it's not. It's not easy. It's possible, it's achievable, and it's important. But it's not easy. As we know, 3 years ago, my wife Karen died. I was walking through the kitchen one day, just a few weeks after she had died. And there's a little plaque in our kitchen that sits on the counter. And it's a plaque that Karen gave me years and years ago. And it says, "You are my happily ever after." And she was mine. This day, as I walked through the kitchen and I walked past the plaque, it caught my attention as it never had before. And I stood there and I read it. "You are my happily ever after." And I thought to myself, how will I be happy now that my happily ever after is gone? I stood there for the longest time. How will I be happy now? Well, I thought to myself, I'm about to find out. I'm coming back. Having decided then that we will take it on, that we're coming back, take it on with a game plan, with a wise, informed, intentional path back to health. Resiliency begins with an attitude that we're coming back, and we're going to come back and we're going to learn and we're going to grow and to be stronger than we ever were before. It begins with that, and then with an informed path, a game plan, a strategy of how we're going to get there. Rarely do we wander. I don't hear this word often enough. Rarely do we wander. I think I'm dating myself. Rarely do we wander or meander back into full, healthful living. That leaves it up to luck. And we want far better chances than that. We want to get educated. We want a plan. We want a path. Again, our circumstances may be out of our control, but what we do with it, how we take control is very much within our grasp. So take control. If it's grief or anxiety or trauma or addiction, start asking questions. Get curious and be specific. Whatever you're going through, ask yourself, what am I experiencing? What am I feeling? With what form of distress am I dealing? then, what is my best path to healing? What are the resources that I will need the most? Where will I find them? Where will I engage this process? Who will guide me therapeutically? Who will support me emotionally? Where and how do I begin? When I said goodbye to Karen, it was awful. Pain was, as many of you know what the pain was. It was terrible. But I had one big advantage. I knew how to mourn. I knew it personally from years ago, and I knew it professionally from having walked, just as Grace does, from having walked with countless others through their own grief journeys. So I knew how to do it. It didn't make it any easier. It didn't make it any less painful, but it gave me confidence. I knew what it was doing, I knew how to engage it, and I engaged it. That's what I want everybody to have. And that is learning the path, defining what my distress is, defining what the dynamic is, and then identifying what do I need to do to successfully address that. I have got to do my homework to find that out. If you don't know the best path back, then engage the resources to find it. If you struggle with any mental or emotional distress, then you need to know what's behind it in order to get a solid clinical reading on how best to address it. Let me just take 1 second to pick an emotion. Let's talk about depression for just 1 second. Depression, the word depression is just a word for which there are 9 emotions in the diagnostic manual. There are 9 emotions under depression. If you have 5 or more of them, you're depressed. Okay? Not overly helpful in terms of what you do with that, but that's what depression is. That's the result. If you have 5 or more, then you're depressed. What I must do then is to discern what is the origin of the depression if I then am going to find the most successful resolution to my depression, because there are several origins to it, and the word itself doesn't give. The word itself just defines what the emotion is like. By the way, as an aside, you know the number 1 treatment for depression? It is not Prozac. It is not Lexapro. It is not therapy. Going out and buying something. Retail therapy. And this is why it's so popular. You ready? This is why it's so popular. It works for 3 days. And then the shiny objects are not so shiny anymore, and so I've got to go out and buy something else. No, we can do better than retail therapy. When it comes to depression, then, just to use this as an example, some of the origins of depression are a genetic vulnerability with which one may be born, an extended time of emotional distress, a history of repressed emotions, or a particularly stressful event that has not been successfully processed. All these are different origins. If I'm depressed or anxious or anything else, I've got to define what's the origin of this. And then given that origin, then how do I engage a successful path back via resiliency to health and thriving in that life of all abundance again? To address any significant mental or emotional distress, I've got to find my path. Okay, number 1, lifestyle. I'm going to move along here. Lifestyle. Number 2, attitude. Number 3, game plan. Next, support. Embrace your closest relationships and your most important community. And I know for many of you, you're sitting in the middle of your most important community, and with many of your most important relationships as we speak. I have rarely known of anyone to fully heal back into a life of fulfillment and wholeness alone. It doesn't happen in isolation. Emotional healing and restoration happens in community, in loving, caring relationship. Don't even think of doing this alone. Remember when Jesus said, when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I will be with you. When 2 or 3 are gathered in the loving Spirit of Jesus Christ, there is something special that happens. When your Stephen minister visits you, when your clergy person is with you, when your friends from your Sunday school class gather, or in Sunday school on Sunday morning when they have that prayer for you because they know that you're struggling. 2 or 3 or more just gathered, and Christ's Spirit is with you. There is no overstating the importance of community and relationship and how it facilitates healing. Those are sacred moments. I think of that wonderful line, the poem, The Aurora Leigh by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. It's a long, long poem. And there are just these few lines out of the middle of it in which Browning, in which Browning uses as a metaphor the burning bush, Moses and the burning bush. And these are the lines: earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But only they who see take off their shoes. The rest just walk around it, picking blackberries. So many people don't recognize that's sacred ground. It's time to slip off the sandals. So many don't realize that when 2 or 3 are gathered in support, that something wonderfully healing is happening. Embrace your relationships and your community. As Jacob said to his brother Esau when he was warmly welcomed by his brother, for truly to have seen your face is like seeing the face of God. With such favor have you received me. In especially challenging times, seek out your relationships. Stay well within your community. This is one of the reasons there are many reasons, but one of them is it allows us to verbalize, it allows us to share in that relationship what we're going through. It allows us to share in that relationship the agony, the distress that we're going through. You see, anytime something happens to us that is distressing, that is traumatic, we are infused with emotional input. We're going to be talking about this more next spring. We are infused with emotional input. It throws us off balance. It throws us into disequilibrium. The way we right the ship from the input is with output. Where 2 or more are gathered, when you gather together with your best friend and your friend says, "How are you doing?" And you know they mean it, and you share it with them, that input begins to be dissipated with the output. Thank you, Jesus. I have the opportunity to talk about it. I have often said that if someone is going through a particularly difficult time and you don't know them well, send them a card. If you know them moderately well, take them anything from Honore's. If you know them well, go by and give them a hug. And if you know them really well, pull up a chair, ask them how they're doing, and be very quiet and listen. Where 2 or 3 are gathered. we then begin to heal as we express how we feel, as we pour out our heart to someone who really wants to know. In your time of turmoil, they will anchor you. And in theirs, you will anchor them. And as we are anchored with the emotional support at our side, we next are anchored with the spiritual support of our faith. Barbara Brown Taylor once wrote, "Emotional distress makes theologians of us all." Deep distress, I should say, makes theologians of us all. Deep suffering prompts within us deep questions, like why? Why, oh God, why? After our son was killed, it was within a week or so after, I was visiting with a minister friend of mine who's a real straight shooter. And Fred said to me, "Greer," and this is in regard to, obviously, to Eric's death. He said, "Greer, when I cross the Jordan, I'm going with questions." Deep suffering makes theologians of us all. Why is there pain and suffering? Will be high on my list. I've given it much thought over the years, and I have made my peace with the fact that this side of the Jordan, I'm not really going to know. It's above my pay grade, and that's all right. There are plenty of mysteries in this life, and that happens to be one of them. As Paul put it, now we see through a glass darkly, and then face to face. But what I do know, and my word is this ever at the heart of my resiliency, is that God's spirit of grace, support, and guidance is with me every step of the way. In the midst of my most turbulent waters, I have always felt anchored by the clarity that I was grounded by something greater than myself, something supportive and profoundly gracious. And by the way, secular studies continue to back up, in secular studies on resiliency, continue to back up what I was saying earlier about faith. They show that the resilient tap into what they refer to as a power greater than themselves. I think that power is what we call God. Deep suffering makes theologians of us all. Are you with me in this, O Lord? Jesus was crystal clear about his response to that question. God's love never leaves us. God's nearness and love are always there. His Spirit is empathetically beside us. The very last words in Matthew's gospel are the final words of the resurrected Christ, in which he said, as we know, "And remember, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." His spirit of love never leaves. But if you want a visual of God's love, look into the eyes and down the cheeks of Jesus as he was literally moved to tears, walking in and seeing Mary and Martha's suffering at the death of their brother. The empathy that they saw in Jesus' eyes is the empathy we all experience from Almighty God. And finally, later on, after we've done the needed work for healing, look for the growth that lies beyond the heartache. With resiliency we come back. We may well come back the stronger for having been there. Weeping may linger for the night, as the psalmist wrote, but joy comes with the morning. We talked about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. We talked about PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury. There's another PTG, post-traumatic growth. From trauma research, it is estimated that after a significant traumatic event, about 80% of those who go through that experience within a matter of months are back to the life that they knew before, back to normal. About 80% are. About 10% are not. They are still traumatized by it and they're still working through it, which leaves another 10%. And the other 10% have grown from the experience, the PTG, post-traumatic growth through resiliency. So how do we do this? We're back to attitude. We reframe the experience from one in which we can survive to one from which we intend to grow. We've all been broken somehow, some way. But always, always remember, sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. So we ask the question, what have I learned from this experience? What do I know now that I didn't know before? About my life, about myself. What are my takeaways? What are my life lessons that I will take with me for the rest of my life? This is the way I think of it. I think of the ache and pain of life's struggles as being the tuition I pay for the life lessons I gain. And given how expensive that tuition is, be sure and show up for class. Don't miss the lessons of these moments. And this is why your best, your very finest self may yet be to come. It was once said, mosaics are made of broken pieces, and they are beautiful works of art. And so are we. Ours is a faith of resiliency. We come back the stronger for having been there. We believe that there are resurrections behind each of life's crucifixions, that God can use what God didn't choose, that God can use disappointment, heartache, suffering, that God would never have wished for us, ultimately for our good. We come out of the wilderness of whatever heartache with a greater wisdom and depth, with a new clarity of who we are personally within, a strength, reserves that we did not know were there until we had to reach down, draw on them, and pull them up because the challenge was that great. And having discovered them, then we go forward into the rest of our lives with the confidence of knowing that those reserves, that God-given strength is there for us. As it has been said, a diamond is just a piece of carbon that handles stress remarkably well. We often start our journeys up from the depths of the valleys. We learn from our mistakes, we grow from our failures, we become stronger from our wounds. May we come back having grown from having been there. I love the quote of Catherine McKenna. She said it to me so beautifully. Now, every time I witness a strong person, I want to know, what dark did you conquer in your story? Mountains do not rise without earthquakes. She was a single mother, destitute, not knowing how she was going to provide for herself and her daughter. She was barely living above homelessness. Several years later, in 2008, she gave the commencement address at Harvard University. And in talking about this terrifying and agonizing time in her life, J.K. Rowling of Harry Potter fame said to the graduating class, and so, rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I have built the rest of my life. Say amen, church. And I immediately thought of the psalmist, for he is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold. I shall not be shaken. It is the resiliency of God's faith that grounds us, that anchors us, that helps us to heal, and that then points us and invites us into the growth by which we can become someone we have never been before. It is a delight, as always, to join you at Dunwoody. Thank you, Diane, for having invited me. It is time to stop, and anyone that's got any thoughts or questions, I'm going to hang around, and I will be here. But it is, again, it is a delight to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you again, Ron, for being
Yes,
here
indeed.
with us tonight.
Yes,
Thank
indeed.
you so much, and we look forward to having you back in the spring. So we will let you know what that date and time is very soon.
Good, good.
You're welcome to leave or you're welcome to stay, whatever is on your mind.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Good to be with you. Thank you. Come here, buddy. Was it okay? Are you getting tired? Did I keep you up tonight? Well, let me tell you, buddy, I want you to know